Hey, ErikOnPaper here, and in case you hadn't figured it out, I'm Erik. So we're going to be doing a drawing of my friend Mary, or AviaCosplay as she is known. I'm pretty sure she was born AviaCosplay, but her pseudonym is Mary. So let's get started.
The first and most important thing when you're drawing a reference off of a real life photograph or a person or specifically a cosplayer is to get their permission. I can understand for certain details like, oh, I want to see how some cloth bends or a shirt folds, so I'm going to look at this model. That is one thing, but when you are drawing a specific person, in this case, Avia Cosplay, I reached out to get her permission first before I even did this drawing, and she said to pick whatever image I wanted to use of her. That would be fine. And I looked through everything and I found this beautiful image of her shot up in Mukilteo in Washington of her as Wonder Woman, and I love the nobility that the pose had and the expression on her face, and I wanted to capture that. And then it was just a matter of the usual process of penciling, inking, and I will do digital colors on this piece. The main thing is when you select a drawing or an image you want, you have to really keep mindful of what it is you want to say about the character. Are they deadly? Are they angry? Are they sexy? Are they playful? In this case, I wanted Wonder Woman to look very noble. Since I'm going to be inking my own work, I try to keep it fairly loose. But in this case, since Wonder Woman and this particular costume has a lot of armor and raised pieces, I have to pencil in those details for myself. I'm not going to rely on memory to get the shapes right and things like that. And then going in with a roller, she uses a straight sword. There's no reason uh, to eyeball that, and using a French curve to get the shape of the shield just right. And it looks strange, but it's at a three-quarter perspective, so it's not flat. If it was flat, it would disappear, or it would appear around her head, but that is not the case here. And I do my best to check my measurements throughout the drawing. Now, getting to the inking stage, I did a very light job on the environment when it came to penciling because I know most of that detail is going to be in the inks. And I start with a brush to get the shapes and twist and turn the paper around as needed to get all the details just right. And keeping in mind line weights and curves, um, I am trying to do more and more brush work because the brush gives a more organic feeling, and in particular along the areas of exposed skin. And the hair details, adding the sheens. Actually, you don't really add, you just, the sheen, you add the darkness around. Now, the water was pretty interesting and fun to do. I had got this off of a Joe Cuber tutorial through the courses that they offer, and one of the uh, examples was him just using a brush and going along inking in the darker parts of the waves and letting your mind fill in the rest. Now I switched over to a quill because I didn't want something as flat as a micron, but I needed something sharper than a brush, so that's the quill, the perfect hybrid. And I used that to detail the majority of her armor. And then I'm finding out that the quills work really well for clouds. And here I'm going in with a calligraphy brush pen. I got it Michael's, I believe. I think it cost $4 or $5, but I absolutely love this pen. After a while, it starts to get a dry brush effect, and even though I'm using it to fill in some of the darker areas, when it starts to go into the dry brush, I use that for shading on the armor. Gives it a more metallic look, and I'm going to go in and refine those shapes in the shading later. As I was inking it, I realized that this piece was all about texture and getting the feeling right. Because when you're drawing from a photograph, you have all that detailing there, and you can choose to render it however you want. You can go as elegantly simple as Mike Mignola, or as complicated and detailed as someone like Arthur Adams or Jim Lee. I have and I don't even compare myself to those three, like I'm at that caliber, but it's more the feeling I'm going for. Now here I went in and with some Copic pens actually started adding in a bunch of detailing for the ground. And this was a really rocky beach. Or sandy beach. There is no way you can get all those details in there. So what I did is started to suggest the level of detailing in there by giving the eye some key points and key details, and then filling in the rest with rendering, stippling, and other effects like that. Now for the coloring. The first thing you do is you get the background right because that's going to inform everything else about your scene. And it's tempting to do the cool render on the hero first, but getting the background details right grounds the character in a reality. In this case, there's a sun in the image, and that's going to inform the lighting for the clouds and the rest of the background. And also, that is going to inform where the light will be cast on the ocean. And I went broad at first and then just added highlights in using the screen mode as seen in other tutorials to get it right. And if things look like they're flashing, that's sometimes me experimenting and not liking something. I used a specific brush just to get the sand looking lit. I wasn't going to draw every single dot. Now, faces are incredibly challenging to do. I just on the image itself, it looked like the photographer used a bounce card, and that bounce card reflected back onto Mary, so I had to keep that in mind. And working through it, I wanted to keep the golden hues of the sun as much as possible, but just using the screen mode alone, I realized that would be impossible. Plus, she's starting to look an unnatural shading, so I went back in and added another color on top of the sunlight color that I used for the environment. Typically, the way I like to render is actually with a bunch of softer colors. It just gives it a look that I like. There are many different styles of rendering, of course. And wanting a harder orange cast, oh, actually, I just went to the lips here. The screen mode wasn't working for me, but once I got the shape that I wanted, I just went in and changed it to a normal mode with a lower opacity. And liking that effect, I started adding in orange to the other elements of the skin. Now, adding in the yellow highlights of the sun, I wanted to make sure that the texture was different from the other, from the skin, and then when I would get to the metal, those would have different highlights. As you can see here, just making sure that the metal looked like it had a gleam to it. And the Wonder Woman armor didn't look particularly battle damaged or rough or worn, so I just wanted to reflect that and not, when I did the rendering, have any kind of dirt or grit to it, just making her look very, very heroic. Rendering metal is actually probably the most fun and easiest thing. Well, I shouldn't say easiest, but it's the most fun thing to do, to play around with all the highlights and sheens you can get, but you have to be careful that they make sense with the rest of your drawing. And here I was just lucky enough to be able to reference a photograph. And with metal, you definitely want to keep the edges darker, unless, of course, reflecting light directly. And I know I'm going to go in with a special effects layer and add white over the line art, like simple white gradients. Not too many, but just enough to really stand out and gleam. And no matter what medium you're using to render your drawings, if it's Copic markers, colored pencils, paints, digitally, make sure it goes with the mood that you want and the story you want to tell or express with the character. And yeah, keep your light source consistent. There I am adding the highlights from the sun, giving the shield a nice rim light. And pretty soon here we're going to come up on adding the special effects layer. Now you do that with a black layer on top of everything. set that mode to screen, and then start painting on lighter colors like I did with the ocean, and just simple gradients for her armor. Just do what you feel is appropriate. You can overdo it, like I just was not getting the highlight on her sword to work and her hair was a bit too much. And I chose to blur out the background, and then I did an adjustment grade over everything just to see how I would like it, and here is the final result that I'm a fan of.
I'd like to thank my friend Mary, also known as AviaCosplay, for letting me use a photo reference of her. And please follow her social media. She is really talented and really great at what she does. And please like and subscribe to my channel while you're at it.